I know I told you guys yesterday that today we were going to get a compilation of Ouija board stories, but I actually had a story sent in to me, and the reasoning for it's really special, and it made me tear up, so I want to give it its own video, specifically so this person can go back and hear the story again. They said their grandfather used to tell this story, and he passed recently, and they did not want this story to pass with him, and it broke my heart, and I want to give it its own video, because just like the memory of your grandfather, this story will live on, and I want you to be able to come back and find it really easily to listen to it, if you ever want to that follower, and to you guys, because I've already read it, and it's phenomenal. So that's all the intro for this video. Let's get straight into the story. Papa had one bedtime story that he would tell. The only variation was the length, but it was always the same story. Papa passed this year, and I've been trying to write this since Halloween of last year. I knew I wouldn't have time to ask him the questions for another Halloween and wanted to write it down. I wasn't ready to do it, and now I'm left doing it after his death. He grew up in Moss, Tennessee, and this is either 100% his brainchild or a local story. I don't know, and Papa wouldn't tell. I don't want Papa's bedtime story to die off with him, so I'm going to try to tell a longer format. 14 days, but it could be dropped down to just as short as 3. Papa told me once that he did a 2-month-long story with my mom and said never again. When telling the story, Papa always had the child, Mom, then me, sit on his lap, and this will make sense in the end. Now let's get into the story. Back in the holler where time had forgotten lived an old couple. Their children had moved away from the farm, and they were the only people left anywhere near. It was harvest time, and the crops needed taken to town, bills paid, and resources purchased before the winter hit. The nearest town was separated from the farm by a bridge, but it had been washed out in the last big storm of the year. The old men had to go further away to do their business in town on the same side of the river, then go to the bank to make the yearly payment. He expected to take a fortnight, since nor he or the horses were all that spry anymore. Shaking his head, he mused about how he used to do this trip in 8 days when he was a newlywed and was the only option. Walking back to the porch after packing the wagon and hitching the horses, he went to his wife to give her a goodbye kiss. "Do you remember our nightly call when I'm gone?" Giggling like a schoolgirl again instead of an old woman. "Who's going to spend this long, lonesome night with me?" "I will," he smiled, kissing her on the cheek before going back to the barn. The old woman watched her husband drive away until she couldn't see him anymore, just as she had every year of their marriage. Something on the other side of the very far edge of the back of the property had turned and listened to their exchange. That night she made her meager meal of gruel and placed it on the table, went out to the porch and called out, "Who's going to spend this long, lonesome night with me?" She shook her head, knowing he'd not been heading home yet. She never missed a night call when he was away, though. That thing replied in a gravelly voice, "I will." It crossed the property line with the woman's invitation. The next morning, the old woman looked at the porch ceiling. She hoped her husband remembered to get more paint blue to redo the very faded and flaking paint before the snow started falling. She grabbed a homemade broom and swept the porch. She wasn't finished until lunch. She had to stop more and more before finishing her tasks anymore. Hopefully one of the boys will do it soon and take over the farm, allowing her and Dad to rest. She took care of the cows, sowed, chickens, and mule for the day. She fixed herself the eggs that didn't fit in a mason jar for glassing for dinner. Before digging into her breakfast for dinner, she went to the edge of the porch and called out, "Who's going to spend this long, lonesome night with me?" She went in to eat and sleep for the night. The thing in the woods replied again, "I will." The morning of day 3, the old woman spent the day making butter for the winter, mending her apron, and picking green beans. The daily animal husbandry chores took her morning as always, but she loved those animals. She had fried green beans and hog jaw for dinner. She went to the porch and called out, "Who's going to spend this long, lonesome night with me?" "I will," came the response of the thing on the edge of the furthest pasture. Day 4 started much like the previous days with morning chores. The afternoon and evening was spent stringing and snapping beans and then canning them. That evening she had leftover cornbread and milk after going to the porch and calling out again. This thing near the edge of the furthest pasture replied again. Day 5 was spent in the garden picking over everything that is left. She had a smorgasbord of tomatoes, turnips, potatoes, onions, beans, corn, and greens, a farmer's salad, if you will. She went out to the porch after eating, having forgotten to do it beforehand, and called out yet again. The thing in the woods to the side of the closer pasture called back. Day 6 started normally enough, but around midday one of the couple's sons came to spend some time with their mom and make winter preparations finish quicker. His new wife was able to get to know her mother-in-law for the first time since she was from the big city and hadn't met her. She made dinner with the food they brought with them. The old woman decided to teach her how to cook, like down home when they were with her. That night she went to the porch and called out yet again. This thing in the woods to the side of the closer pasture replied. The addition of more people made it stay and watch instead of moving. Day 7, her son worked on the fences around the yard and finding more and more that needed work. He knew they were going to need more help, but hadn't realized it was this bad. The old woman taught her daughter-in-law how to make soup beans and cornbread, 2 staples her family never had. Before dinner, the old woman went outside to the porch and asked, "Who's going to spend this long, lonesome night with me?" The thing in the woods at the edge of the furthest corner responded, "I will." Day 8, their son and his wife continued to help his mom both around the farm and inside the house. The woman canned food until they ran out of flats and gaskets, part of the lid system. They then started drying and smoking the rest. Her son focused on the barn and chicken coop. And dinner was sausage, potatoes, and green beans with apple fritters. The old woman then went out to the porch after it was finished and asked, "Who's going to spend this long, lonesome night with me?" The thing in the cattle pasture growled, "I will." On day 9, the woman pickled eggs in just finished half-gallon jars of pickles, reusing the vinegar mixture and lid, doing the quicker way so that the jar would need to be eaten sooner than later. Her son finished fixing posts close to the house, making sure that the padlocks it used would survive the coming winter. He needed to leave for home the next day and prioritize the best he could. He had decided he would be moving home in the spring. The night before finishing dinner, the old woman went to the porch and asked, yet again. She taught her daughter-in-law how to fix fried chicken, from butchering to table, along with fried cabbage and fried apples. She wanted them to eat good for their last night with her. The thing behind the barn called out, "I will." On day 10, the son and daughter-in-law left after making sure the old woman didn't need to do hardly any chores until Dad got home. The night before dipping up her bowl of stew, she went to the porch and asked, "Who's going to spend this long, lonesome night with me?" The thing behind the chicken coop answered, "I will." The woman heard something that night and smelled the worst smell of her life. Day 11, the old woman stayed inside the house. She even left the eggs in the coop. She only let the girls out and put them back in early. She barely stuck her head out to ask quietly and quickly, "Who's going to spend this long, lonesome night with me?" The old woman was already inside before the thing at the back of the house responded, "I will." Day 12, the old woman did her outside duties in the middle of the day except her chickens. She adored her girls. She braved early morning and early evening for them. That night she mustered up the courage to go out at twilight and ask, "Who's going to spend this long, lonesome night with me?" She was looking forward to only needing to do this ritual one more night before the old man would return home. The thing beside of the house raggedly responded, "I will." Before it had finished, the old woman had locked up the house tight. Day 13, she did her best to treat it like nothing was wrong, just in case the old man got home early, not that she expected it. Given their ages now, but even when the boys were young, he'd come home early. She didn't know her son would be moving in, but was hoping they would. She missed the sounds of children. She spent all day listening for any sounds. The farm and the woods were too quiet. She had to be ready for him to come home. She wanted to be able to spend the next morning sweeping the house so it'd be as clean as she could. That night, she screwed up the last of her courage to stick her head out the door and ask with a quivering voice, "Who's going to spend this long, lonesome night with me?" The creature bounded up the porch and grabbed her. This is where the kid is grabbed by the sides and shook a little, growling, "I will." That is my new favorite story, and if I ever have kids, I will be telling them that story. That is phenomenal. Thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate that so much. I know that was so special to you and your mom, and I really hope that someone hears the story and adopts that into their routine because it was phenomenal. I loved it. I loved it so much. Thank you guys so much for sending in your stories. Thank you specifically to this person. This was really special to me. I will see you again on Monday where we will be reading the Ouija board stories.